continue. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you for joining in. The webinar will cover both IELTS and TOEFL, which are both the English language exams that you will need to give as part of your application to study in universities which have English as a medium of instruction. They will also be used for your visa purposes when you're applying abroad. So with that, I will be covering the IELTS portion of it, and then we will have Madeeha who will go ahead and explain more about TOEFL. And there'll also be enough time for everybody who's present in the webinar to ask their questions. So again, norms for the questions. If there is anything that you would like to ask based on whatever is being discussed, then feel free to type it in the chat box. So somehow the view in front of me, like just the presenter view is such that maybe I'm not able to see it in time, but I will try to keep a track and try to answer any questions which are relevant to the topic that we're talking. So you can post those questions, and then at the end of this, any general questions can also be put forth. So how we are planning to do this flexibly is that I might speak for something around 15 to 20 minutes about the IELTS. Then there'll be a 10-minute slot for you to ask any questions regarding that. And then Madeeha will go for another 20 minutes or so, followed by another round of questions. So the IELTS exam, you have two options based on the medium in which you would like to attempt the exam. You have the computer-based IELTS and the paper-based IELTS. Now the computer and the paper-based exams in terms of their format are exactly the same. It's only the mode of the exam which differs. And it is to be noted that this is different from TOEFL. So TOEFL paper-based examination is completely different. And I think Madeeha would be able to address a point on that later. But yeah, on the TOEFL exam, of course, you'll most probably in all likelihood be giving the internet-based, which you attempt on a computer. Whereas for the IELTS, the computer-based, like I said, is exactly the same as the paper-based. So you can choose to give any of them. The only difference is that if you take the computer-based exam, you're using a computer and a keyboard and a mouse to answer your questions, to type in your responses. Whereas if you take the paper-based exam, it is going to look something like this. This will be your sheet. You write in your essay instead of typing it, and you write in your answers. So that is the main difference that stands between the computer-based and the paper-based. However, the speaking test in both the cases will be exactly like the same. So both of them will have a face-to-face speaking section. So even if you give the computer one, you won't have to speak to a computer. It will happen face-to-face to another person. And just drawing from there to the structure of the exam. So apart from the computer-based and the paper-based distinctions, the other distinction is that you have a general IELTS test and you have an academic IELTS test. How these two stand, so I think all of us who have joined this webinar would be taking the academic test because we would be writing that exam as prospective students. Whereas the IELTS general exam is used in a limited capacity. For example, immigration purposes or maybe in some other professional roles, but usually in most professional and academic roles, you will have to have an IELTS academic score. So that is something we can be mindful of while booking. And even on the test date in the same examination center, you will have people attempting the academic IELTS and the general IELTS. So to make sure that we are getting the right set of questions. So about the IELTS academic test, we have the listening, reading, and writing, which are conducted on the same day. And then you have a speaking test, which is conducted on a different date, which might be within a week before or after your main exam of the listening, reading, and writing. So the listening section goes for 30 minutes. You have reading for 60 minutes and writing for 60 minutes. So the reading and writing sections are the ones which are different for the academic and the general test, whereas the listening and speaking remain exactly the same for the general and the academic test. So just to summarize, IELTS academic test is the one that we will be taking, the students who are attending this webinar. And on one day, we will have a 1.5 hour long exam covering the 3 sections with no breaks in between. And on another day, in the following week or so, you will have an 11 to 14 minute speaking exercise in which you're speaking face to face with another person, the examiner. Um, and be it your computer-based delivery mode or a paper-based delivery mode, which you've chosen for the first sections, speaking will always be face to face. Now, just coming to what would be a target score when you're thinking of giving these exams, these English language exams. So this is a table which I have very simply plugged out from the University of Oxford's website. It is one of the more competitive universities and of course reputable. So I thought that if we just take it as a benchmark, it would be nice. I mean, it would put us at a safe side to what we are scoring. So all of the universities, I mean, I don't think there will be universities which will be requiring scores which are very different from these. Now, for the IELTS, if you can see, they have regarded it as 2 separate ones. So you have standard level scores and then you have higher level scores. So for now, this will depend on the degree that you are applying for. Some might require standard level scores, some might require higher level scores. It could also be that universities which are more technical would be fine with the standard level score, whereas universities which have more coursework might want higher level scores where you have more writing components and more engaging with theoretical frameworks and those sorts. But nevertheless, this is a good benchmark. And as we can see, so they've given an overall band of a 7 or a 7.5. And similarly, they've given a minimum of a 6.5 per component and a minimum of a 7 per component. So just to pause here, I may not have mentioned it, but IELTS is scored on bands from 1 to 9. You usually don't get a 1 unless you don't score anything like a 0 or something. So ideally from a 2.5, even if you get 4.5, 2 or 3 questions correctly. But let's just say it scores, so the scores go like 2.5, 3, 3.5, so on till 8.5 and 9. So it's score on a band of 9. So in that, like it is mentioned here, a 7.5 overall score is good. But how I would really push it is that we focus on the scores that we are getting for every band. So for listening, speaking, reading, and writing, if we are targeting to get a minimum 7 on each of them, I think that is a good target to have. So like we can see here, if we get a minimum of 7 on each band, and if you get a minimum of 7, chances are you get more than 7 on some or the other bands, and so your overall will be 7.5 or higher. So this similarly for TOEFL, on the slide you will be able to see what are the scores that you can aim for each section. And so when you're practicing or doing practice tests, it's good to aim for how much you're getting under each listening, reading, speaking, and writing band, so that you know that you are covering universities like these. In general, 7 is a score which is acceptable for most universities, but 7.5 is the one that you should target for. So this is just a walkthrough of the different sections. So I will keep, because we're keeping track of the time, and this is information that you will be able to get easily. I've attached the link of it at the end of the slide. I am going to go very quickly through these. So in the listening section, 30 minutes, you will listen to 4 things, and it's almost like you're listening to it simultaneously. You have fill in the blanks, and then you keep filling those blanks. So it's fairly simple. Again, listening for academic and general is the same, which is one of the reasons why you could say it's simple. So it would just be, maybe you're hearing a conversation about an everyday context. The second recording would be one person speaking, so it's a monologue, a speech of sorts. And then a third recording would be a conversation between a group of people, and then you're listening to that and comprehending it and just fill in the blanks. So it's more like filling in those paraphrased blanks. And then the fourth one would be a monologue, which is a little bit more academic in nature, but again, fairly simple, and you're filling in those blanks. So basically, it is trying to assess if you are able to understand information when it is given to you, and probably fill it up in a paraphrased format so that you're able to express it. Now, the academic, this is followed by the reading. Academic reading will be different. So you will have passages. Consider those like reading comprehension passages. Go with the flow. There will be 40 different types of questions. You fill that up, and that's your reading section. This is followed by the writing section, which has 2 tasks. The academic writing section has 2 tasks. And in the first task, so now both of these tasks vary in length, which means the first task is about 150 words, the second is about 250 words. So a good way to divide your time is to give 20 minutes to the first task and 40 minutes to the second task. And so the first task gives you some kind of infographics. It could be a graph, a chart, a table, or a diagram. And what you have to do is that you have to see that, interpret it, and write it in your own words. And so if you, so it goes in a very strategic format. So if you already know what are the words that you can use to, for example, if it's a bar graph, what can you use? If it's a pie chart, how do you see data and you interpret it in regular words? That is what the task wants you to do. So a couple of practice tests and just seeing those model answers will give you a good idea on how to attempt this first one. It's very, very strategic. You simply go and fill up that template of sorts which you have already practiced, and you can make that, you can get a hang of that in a few practices. The second task will give you an argument. So you have to write for or against an argument. You could almost consider it like a debate, and see what is your point of view. Again, if you go through some of the model answers, then you will be able to chalk down, say, if your technique is to approach it in 3 paragraphs or 4 paragraphs, how do you begin and how do you end, and how do you put forth your argument for or against that problem. And that goes for about 250 words, your later 40 minutes of the essay. Following with the speaking section, which is conducted on a separate day. Now this, so there are many reasons why you would choose to give the IELTS or the TOEFL exam, but this could be one of the reasons. So even though the IELTS is based out of, let's say, it's handled by the British Council and the IDP. So it's definitely something that is accepted by all universities in the UK. But similarly, in whichever universities I applied to, they were ready to take TOEFL as well. So I never actually encountered a UK university that would not accept the TOEFL. Similarly, I had applied in North American universities, I applied to Canada. So IELTS was an accepted format. So it will be lesser about, even though that is a valid point, but it'll be lesser about your prospective university, but you can just see which test taking style might suit you better. So yeah, like I was saying, speaking is one of those sections which might be one of your reasons to decide whether you take an IELTS or a TOEFL. And the difference is that in the TOEFL exam, you speak to a computer, whereas in the IELTS one, it's on a separate day and you speak to an examiner. So depending upon your preference or your comfort, if you want to do it the same day and you're comfortable in an electronic system, that you might want to consider taking the TOEFL, and if it's accepted at all the universities that you wish to apply to. Whereas the IELTS, if you think you'll be more comfortable having a person in front of you and having a normal conversation with them, in that case, your speaking IELTS could be your preferred mode. So for me, I felt that the speaking section was fairly simple. I felt it was actually very, very simple. You could go ahead and talk to the examiner about general questions that they ask about your interests and how you may have dealt with a certain incident. So it's very guided and structured task in which you're just conversing with a person, and then they might give you so in part 2 they'll give you time to speak about a certain topic. Similarly, in part 3 you will have the opportunity to discuss some ideas and really present your ideas. But yeah, you're talking to a person, and that's your mode of interaction. The next slide, and this is almost the concluding slide. So I'm talking about the resources. Now, when you register for an IELTS test, you'll get a practice book delivered to the address that you have mentioned. And that practice book contains a good number of a good number of practice tests, and those tests have model answers behind. So they have the answers, and then for exercises like writing, they will have model answers behind them. So if you read through those, all of those, I think you should be good to go. I would say the IELTS preparation time could be something like 10 days for getting a good score, the score that you need. So the IELTS book that you get when you register for the test, that's a good one. I found YouTube very, very helpful, especially for speaking and writing sections. So you can get a lot of tips about writing. You can get model answers. You can hear model speaking exercises, and they are, I think, very close to what happens on the actual test. So just going through YouTube for speaking and writing tips is a good idea. Apart from that, if you want to buy one book for your IELTS preparation, and I think it's fairly cheap in India, so you can definitely buy it and probably pass it on to somebody else after you who's planning to take the test. But it's a good book to buy. Is the Cambridge IELTS Guide. Now IELTS is designed by the Cambridge University Press. So they are the ones who designed the test. This guide contains practice questions. It also contains tips to answer, to attempt different sections. So this is a good book if you want to complete in its entirety, get some model answers. If you still think you want more practice for further questions, Cambridge University Press has a series of maybe 11 or 12 books, which are just books which have practice tests, and again, like model responses, and all of these come with CDs, so you can practice listening as well. For speaking, you can get tips from here, but again, I think I found that the most easiest to, again, go to YouTube, listen to model answers, and I felt that even without having any like additional preparation, I was able to get an almost perfect score there. So it's not something to worry a lot about. And I'm sure Madeeha will be able to give really good tips on speaking, which would be applicable to both. So that's about the resources that you can go for. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Warda. Okay, guys, please, I request to unmute yourself and then go ahead with the questions. Yeah, so take this opportunity to get answers for all your thoughts, like whatever you think about. Okay, please go ahead.
I wanted to ask, what part of the test should you most focus on while preparing for the test?
Right. I think now it will depend on what you're more comfortable with. I'll tell you what I found easy. So I found the listening very easy. And I also found the speaking easy. Apart from that, reading, of course, a little bit of practice. For me, it varies from person to person, but for me, I think it was writing. Writing could have improved, like I could have focused more on it. I could have improved more on it. So writing, it would be, yeah. I think a good way would be to take a practice test. You don't need any prior preparation. See which are the sections in which you're not scoring the best, and maybe go ahead with that.
Okay, thank you, Api.
Welcome.
And also there is sometimes you have to look into the graduate program requirements, because sometimes they specifically ask for like a particular score from writing section or reading section. Right. I'm talking about the TOEFL.
Yeah,
it's
similarly,
very
even
specific
on,
then.
Yeah. Now that you say, I remember. So in some of the courses, for example, they'll say we want a minimum of 6.5 on each, but a 7 on the writing section. This happened. And so in that case, even if you have like an overall 7.5 or even an 8, but you've dropped in one section, you might be at a disadvantage there. Approach to improve vocabulary and writing skills. Now, just to say, unlike the GRE, this is not a very like they're not looking for a very high level. I wouldn't say high level, but I'm just saying like the GRE assesses you on different things. This is just mainly seeing, are you able to thrive socially in an environment when you go to study in a university, right? So the writing skills, that it is like it's going to look for general vocabulary. So maybe in the writing section, it will look at the fact that you're using different words and you're not repeating the same kind of words, but they don't necessarily have to be a high, like it doesn't have to be a very high level vocabulary. And similarly for writing skills, one of the tips that you can take for it is that they want to see that you've used a range of, say, grammar concepts or a range of punctuations, and you've used them appropriately. If you use different kinds of punctuations and you don't use them well, then that is not like, that's going to actually, that might drop your score. But what I'm saying is that you just have to show them that you can use a range of vocabulary and a range of grammatical concepts well in an appropriate format, and that is your basic requirement that you're trying to achieve. And also being mindful of the time, that you just have like 20 to 40 minutes on an exercise. So what is the best that you can do in that time to demonstrate that you will be able to socially live in an environment? Is accent an issue for listening section for Indian students? So in listening section, no, I think I felt that they go through the listening section very slowly. I mean, it's not a very fast conversation, so you won't face, I think you won't face an issue, but do take practice tests and you'll know that better. Okay, I'm reading the questions and I will take them together. Okay. I will see if Madeeha has a better answer to Ajmal's question of reading, and I'll answer the other one, which is asking for arguments, right? You're asking arguments for the speaking section or the writing section, Samina? Writing section. No, I think it'll also be important to show like they're not only looking for correct grammar, but they're also looking for if you're able to take a stance and actually, live up. Like if you're taking a stance, then you're proving that you've taken that stance, and you're not showing, okay, you agree, but you disagree. You might again, like if you do go through the paragraphs, you'll get a better idea of model answers. But if you're taking a stance, then you stick with that stance. So that's what they're trying to see if you're able to if you're able to kind of defend yourself there.
I agree with your point, Warda. Like you said that watching YouTube videos for some sections are really helpful. And that was my experience as well when I was preparing, like, let's say 8 years ago, it was the same.
So for the, especially for, so the writing task, the first writing task, like I said, you can almost develop your strategy. What is your strategy? How do you attempt that section? So you can take like vocabulary from them and they'll give you good vocabulary. For example, this is something that I remember quickly and I'm just sharing it as an example. You will develop it on your own. But you have graphs and you see that something is dropping down and then something is going up. So you catch vocabulary, something like, okay, it plummeted. So then you know that that's a good word to use. It's better than your usual, it decreased or something like that. So that's the kind of vocabulary that you can already have at hand. So when you're when you're beginning the exam, you know that if something relatable happens, these are the words that you can use and this is the structure that you can go ahead with.
And what do you say about the time management thing? Because that's also a pressure there to maintain things in time.
Yeah, I think in the listening one, you just have to go along with the conversation that is happening. That's not an issue. With the reading, and this I can then address Ajmal's question also. Um, I would actually first go through the questions and then see the paragraph. So that helped me. But some people prefer reading the paragraph, and in IELTS, it's not as much an issue as it is on the GRE. So yeah, that, and then knowing that on your writing task you have to give 20 and 40 minutes, so that is your divide. When you're practicing, you practice the same way, and on that day, if you think you've given 25 minutes to the first task, you know that you have to buck up.
Okay. So is there further question? Otherwise, then we go to the TOEFL section then.
Yeah,
So I see, yeah, we can just go to the next section. So we welcome Madeeha now as our speaker for the TOEFL section. Madeeha Zubair will now present to you how to prepare good for the TOEFL. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So today we're going to talk about how to prepare for TOEFL. Just a second. All right, so inshallah we'll be discussing our strategies to prepare for TOEFL exam. And before we start, already we've got Warda who has introduced us with the difference between TOEFL and IELTS. The main difference being if your target university accepts any exam exclusively, then you should focus on that exam. Also, Warda talked about how you should have a target score in your head if you know which university you're focusing on or which university is your goal. Then you should know what your target score is. Also, you should know which exam you should be taking. There's a major difference between TOEFL and IELTS. So a few of them being that the speaking exam is only face-to-face in IELTS, while in TOEFL you have an option of speaking to the computer in the internet-based test. So both of them are valid only for 2 years, while the duration for TOEFL has recently decreased to 3 hours, and the duration for TOEFL IELTS is 2 hours and 45 minutes. Both of them have reading, writing, listening, and speaking sections. And TOEFL has internet-based and paper-based type, just like IELTS, but the paper-based test for TOEFL has sort of outdated, and not a lot of universities accept the paper-based test. In the TOEFL exam, you have the option of sending your score to for free for 4 universities while you're registering. So if you know that you're focusing on those 4 universities in particular, you don't have to worry about sending the TOEFL exam report separately, because that costs around $25 for each university. This is a brief overview of the TOEFL pattern. As you can see, there are 4 sections, and unlike the IELTS exam, you have a break in the middle for 10 minutes. And the reading section has 3 to 4 passages, 10 questions for each passage, and the listening section has around 3 lectures and 2 campus conversations. And the speaking section has gotten 1 task removed recently, so there are just 4 tasks, and there are 2 tasks in the writing section. So the total time for the exam is about 3 hours. So these are a few useful resources that you would like to have your hands on once you start preparing for your TOEFL exam. These are all free except for these ones, and I highly recommend you to purchase these practice test. It is like 2 volumes, and it has a total of 13 practice sets. So it's the best practice set I would recommend. And if you have purchased this one, you don't need to purchase anything else. Just practice these tests, and you just need 10 days and these 13 practice tests, and you're good to go. And also make sure that you refer to the official TOEFL preparation playlist and the TOEFL official TOEFL Go app. So make sure if you're preparing TOEFL, make sure that your purchase materials are from ETS and not from, like, try to keep your material from official TOEFL ETS websites as much as possible. You can always refer to extra playlists and extra YouTube videos for extra guidance, but too much guidance can also misguide you. So make sure that you stick to the official guides, official reference materials, and official practice tests. That is the best thing you can have your hands on. And before we starting with our sections, I would like to start with the speaking section, because this one is the most important and the least, we've got the least guidance on this section, because not a lot of people know what the speaking section scores you on. But you also need to have a very high score if you're applying for PhD, because the assistantship positions, they when they allot you with the assistantship position, they judge you based on your speaking section, speaking score. So there are a lot of my friends who actually gotten secured admission into the universities, but they were not able to get any assistantship, any fellowship, because of low speaking scores. So you don't want to be in that position. You have to make sure, just because so that you're not denied any admission just because of speaking score, right? So you have to make sure that you have a good score in this one, and you have to practice a lot for this section. So this section has about 4 tasks, and in the first one, you're required to agree or disagree. Just like Warda mentioned, you have to take a side and stick to it. All right, you cannot change your side in the middle. So for the first task, you will be given 15 seconds to prepare. And in that time, decide what side you're choosing, and write down rapid notes of what you're going to how you're going to justify your stance. It doesn't have to be very genuine. It just has to be, you just have to have coherent ideas, and you don't have to be sounding like you're beating around the bush, like you don't know what you're saying. You have to make sure that your reasons are, like, you have elaborated enough on your reasons. Why do you support or why do you disagree with any statement? All right. And make sure you're not sounding too diplomatic. You have to take a stand and stick to your stance. All right. And the next question would be about campus situation. So in this question, you'll have around 50 seconds, around 60 seconds for your response, and there will be 30 seconds to prepare your response. You'll be having a text that will be displayed on your screen. That could be anything like a campus news or a notice or anything related to that. Then you'll hear to a conversation. So these people will either agree with the change, or they will either express how absurd the change is and how they don't like whatever that change is. So you'll be asked, sometimes you'll be asked the change and what the conversation was about and how the speaker doesn't like it or support it. You'll be asked anything related to the change or the conversation. So none of those will be replayed to you, right? So neither the change will be showed to you again, nor the conversation will be replayed in front of you. So what you have to do is you have to make sure that you listen carefully and write down the important things. And when you read the campus situation, campus news, or whatever that is, you have to make sure that you write down the important points. So in the speaking section and the listening section, note making is the key. You have to make sure that you write down really quickly, make rapid notes of whatever you hear, but not at the expense of missing out the important points. All right. So the next question is going to be very similar to the previous one. You'll have a textbook passage displayed to you, and which will be followed by a short lecture. And usually the exam that would be of some phenomena or some basic concept, and you'll be required to explain that phenomena. chances are that you might not remember everything. And that is why it's best to make notes of what you think you might want to mention in your response, right? Again, try to make your responses that it sounds like the ideas are coherent, and your response should not sound choppy, and you should have correct grammar and fairly rich vocabulary. The last section is the longest one. You will be listening to a lecture, and we'll have to answer any question, some question related to the lecture. So in this one, you'll have 60 seconds for the response. So chances are that you might fall short of words by the end of the time. So you still have time, but you haven't got anything to speak anymore. So that is not a good situation. So you might want to make as much notes as possible so that you can keep speaking throughout the 60 seconds. Even if you're not able to complete your answer and the 60 seconds are over, that's all right. That's not a big deal. That happens most of the time. But if your answer is over and the time is still ticking and you still have time, then that might be a reduction in your score. So these are a few of the strategies and some useful tips that you might find helpful. Don't use these, right? Try to avoid using ums, hms, if you need to think, you just pause. I won't say that you have to completely not use these filler words at all. It's sort of not possible, but try to reduce the usage of these words, because that will make your response sound choppy, and that might sound like you don't know what you're saying. So try to sound a little understandable and fluent and clear to the listener. And of course, if you have your notes ready, what you're going to say, your ideas should be well developed, and your ideas should be coherent. You should have correct grammar and fairly rich vocabulary. So some of you might have given the GRE right away. So if you have a lot of GRE words memorized, try to use some of them, but don't overuse them. That might sound not so natural. And a few things that we're not taught during our anytime during our college life or in school are tone choices. And this is one area that TOEFL responses are judged on. So I'll give an example. Don't sound monotonous, because English, the way Indians speak English, most of the time, chances are that we are being very monotonous. We don't have any rising or falling tones. So that's not a good response. So I'll give you a very short example, because I think I don't have a lot of time. For example, there is a statement, "I'm quitting my job." So this could be having a response of, "Are you serious?" or "Are you serious?" Do you see the difference? So the first one was a rising tone, and the second one was a falling tone. And the first one, "Are you serious?" This is sort of an open attitude response. It's a positive one. It's showing concern. While the second one is more on the negative end. It's like judgmental. "I don't agree with what you're saying." So my point is, try to analyze your tone, because in American English, the tones play a major role in conveying the meaning, right? So these are same words and conveying two different meanings, right? So try to refer to this channel, Rachel's English. And I don't recommend watching all the videos on Rachel's English channel, but try to watch a few videos on tone choices. So that would help you gain like an upper end in the score scale near 29, 30, if that's your aim. Because if you get around 29, 30, there is no chance you're not getting a proper TA-ship and a proper graduate admission or assistantship position. So try to imitate the native speakers in tone choices, in pronunciation, in vocabulary, in the way they emphasize some words more than others. Also, one way you can make use of the time most effectively is by having your templates ready. So for example, you know what the questions are going to be, right? You know that the first question is going to ask me to agree or disagree to a stance. And the second question is going to ask me to just state the change or state whatever the campus notice was. You know those questions. They're just going to be, the content of the questions is going to be different. So you can easily have your templates ready. And this is possible by practicing a lot. I just like I mentioned earlier, you have to purchase those practice tests for the best practice experience. If you're not willing to purchase, like it might sound absurd to purchase a particular practice material just for 10 days, you can collaborate with your friends, and you can all share that material and purchase, and you know your ways. So by practicing those sets, you will understand that you can easily have templates ready for each question type. For example, I agree with the following statement. You don't have to think about how you're going to start. Sometimes you go blank and you be like, how am I going to start the answer? You don't have to think about that, because that is already there in your head by practicing a lot. So what you have to do in the preparation time is you have to write down the body of your response. What are your reasons for agreeing? So you have to write down those points really quickly in just 1 or 2 words for each point. And then you elaborate each point, you dwell on each point, and you don't have to rush on the answers. Just take a deep breath and think about what you're going to say, what you have gotten ready on your piece of paper, and what you're going to say. Just say, don't sound like you're reading it out from somewhere. Just say like you're speaking to someone, like you're trying to convince someone, like you have someone right in front of you. And the good thing is, you're not talking to a real person, right? So you don't have to worry about being nervous. That's just a computer screen, so you can easily act like you're talking to something. And hopefully this is like, if you have any questions, you can ask in the question answer section. So there's also one more thing that you can purchase if you feel like having practicing a lot on your speaking section. So the thing about speaking and writing section is that you don't get scored on those, right? You can only get the best responses and compare your responses to the best responses and gauge yourself. So this is one ETS official practice test that is scored by the ETS website. So you get to purchase one such exam, and you can practice, and you can see where you stand and what are your weaknesses, what are your weak areas, and all these things. You don't get such a feedback after your official TOEFL exam. So this is what I did, and it's not a really good score. It's 21. It's a really very bad score. And this made me realize what are the areas that I have to work on. So they judge your fluency based on 4 major areas. Also, you have to understand that this is not everything. This is not all that you're judged on. There are a lot of other things. This is just what the computer judges you on. And then there are human graders who will give you the actual grade. All right. So, but more or less your scores are based on these criteria. So your fluency is judged based on your speaking rate, if you're too slow or if you're too fast. So you have to maintain a moderate speaking rate, and for how long are you able to sustain your speech without pausing or without using ums, right? And then there is a pause frequency, if you're pausing at the right place, or if you're not pausing at all, or if you're pausing a lot. So those are the things that you have to worry about. Try to stay, have an appropriate pause frequency. And if you're, how often are you repeating the words? Like, this is a very bad statement, I need to go to the library. You'll get real bad scores if you keep repeating your words like that, or if you keep saying your statements like that. And then there is rhythm. How well are you able to pronounce your words? If you are pronouncing like in native speakers, or are your pronunciations completely different from them? And how are you able to stress the right syllables? That's all that matters, actually. And then if you're stressing on the correct vowels, this is how they judge your pronunciation. And then of course vocabulary, if you're using a variety of words, then you're on the higher score range. So these are a few examples of words. that we Indians pronounce differently from Native American speakers. Like it's not worry, it's berry. It's not schedule, it's schedule, right? So these are a few words that you might want to have a look on. It's not coupon, it's coupon. It's not vehicle, it's vehicle. So all these words are examples of how we have the habit of pronouncing it differently. And if we have all our words pronounced the way Indians, the way we pronounce it, and not the way American or native speakers pronounce, then we might be on the lower score range, somewhere here or somewhere here, like I am around 19. That's not a good score. So this was a practice test. So you'll understand with the practice test that where you have to work on what are your weak areas, and then you'll be able to, inshallah, score somewhere around 29, 30. Moving on to our next passage, reading section is quite direct, because if you have given the GRE exam, you must be like having practice of this section. It's not as complex as the GRE exam, because the reading section was having a very complicated set of questions in the GRE exam. These questions are comparatively direct and comparatively easy, but still they do have double meaning questions, and you have to be very attentive. You have to be very focused when you're reading and not miss the main points. Make sure you read, you have a brief look on the passage before you delve into it deeply, because otherwise you might end up reading the passage again and again. You don't want to do that. The good thing about the reading section in TOEFL is the questions are arranged in the order of the answers. So if the answer is in the first passage, you will be getting the first question first, right? So it's arranged like in the passage, so you don't have to search for the answers in the entire passage, right? Most of the questions in the reading section are for 1 point, except the summary one, it's for 2 or 3 points. And there are a lot of strategies in the reading section. You can practice and check which one works for you. Some people have the habit of reading the entire passage before they move on to the questions. Some people just skim through the passage, and then they go to the questions, and then they come back to the passage. The first question is from the first paragraph, and then the second question might be from the second paragraph, and so on. So you can try both ways and see which one works for you. So the key is to practice a lot, because that will only help you in understanding which way works for you. And the next one is the listening section. It consists of 2 conversations and 3 lectures, each one followed by questions from based on those lectures and conversations. So you cannot go back to the you cannot go back to the conversation or the lecture. So make sure you listen very attentively. Listening section can be very easily scored. You can easily score a 30 on 30 on a listening section, but you need to practice making notes. That's very important, because if you miss something, you cannot come back to it. So make sure you are able to comprehend, you're able to absorb the conversation very clearly. Because if you just focus on making notes, and if you don't know what's going on, that might not help you. Pay attention, understand, absorb, write it down at the same time, all at the same time. You cannot just do one thing. Either you're making notes or you're listening. You have to manage paying attention, listening, and writing down notes all at the same time. This comes only by practice. So these are a few common questions in the listening section. So they ask you, what is the lecture mainly about? Why did the student go to the registrar or the professor, or something like that? So you'll be able to answer this question only if you know what happens exactly in the conversation between the student and the lecturer. So make sure you have a very a very deep understanding of what's happening. You need to be able to view it from above. What was the purpose of the student, of why did the student go to the lecture in the first place, right? And you'll be asked such questions: what did the student mean by this statement, and what can be inferred from the student's statement, such and such. So this can be answered only if you analyze what happened after the student's statement. So for example, if the student say, the student only said, so what about the polar bears? And the teacher then goes on to explain more about the deaths of the polar bears, let's say, for example. So you would know that if you're asked, why did the student say what about the polar bears, or what did the student mean by when he said what about the polar bears, you would know that he meant by the deaths of the polar bears. He wanted the professor to emphasize more on the deaths of the polar bears. So if you analyze what happened after the statement, you will be able to explain, or you will be able to understand the inference of that statement, right? So try to have a very close look on what's happening and try to absorb everything that's happening. And it's not a very complicated section. It's it's an easy scoring section. You can easily get a 30. Just make sure that you're super attentive. Going on to the last section, it has 2 tasks. The first one is based on reading and listening. So you read a passage and then you listen to a lecture. So the passage usually consists of a main concept in the first paragraph, which is followed by 3 supporting paragraphs. So, and the lecture has is related to the passage, and is usually opposing a supporting paragraph in the passage. So what you're required to do would be to summarize the points made in the lecture and explain how they oppose each point made in the passage. It's not very difficult. You just have to make clear notes. So I would suggest you that you would think that you have the paragraph in front of your eyes all the time, so you don't have to make the notes of the paragraph. But still, I would suggest you to make notes of the paragraph as well, because that way, if you have to go back to the passage again and again, that wastes your time. So if you have the main points of the passage, you don't have to go back to the passage again. You just have to, refer to your notes, and that would just, help you have more time at your hand. Try to write a long passage, not compromising with the quality of your passage. Elaborate elegantly on each point, and 200 to 200 words is a good length. So try to have a long passage and try to have a very qualitative passage. And the last task of the TOEFL exam would be to express your opinion about the motion and support it with reason. And in this question, you don't have to strictly agree or disagree with this with any motion. You can change sides, but it's good to agree to the statement and also have some bridge words at your dispense all the time. So you don't keep repeating the same words. For example, you'd be like, moreover, on the contrary, I feel. All these words, you can have a look on them, and maybe you don't have to think in the exam what I have to write. So a good thing would be to think about the motion quickly, choose a side, and write 3 to 4 supporting reasons, and then expand each reason. And you can have 4 to 5 paragraphs in your essay, and that's a good length. You can easily have a concluding paragraph, and take a lot of time, but don't end up with a short paragraph. So you can have 300 words, and it's a good length. So you'll have 30 minutes to write 300 words, and make sure that you have good vocabulary in the passages, and you don't end up making grammatical mistakes. So all these things count a lot towards reducing your marks. So with that, we have our TOEFL exam over, and these are some extra resources you'd find at the SSGSA's resource tab. And so if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can even type your questions in the chat box.
Thank you, Madeeha. So please unmute yourself and then continue with the questions.
Right. I have a question regarding the writing section. Like, it is also same
So
in AWS.
there is a question from Ayush Agarwal. can you not take sides in the speaking section and make it a little bit diplomatic? No, you cannot. In the speaking section, you cannot make it diplomatic. That would be, that won't give you marks. You have to choose a side and stick to it strictly. Even if you think your reasons are lame, if you're good enough to explain why you think so, that would help you. So choose a side and stick to it, I would say. Is there any other question? Does that answer your question?
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, actually, I have a question regarding the writing section, which is also like kind of a similar in GRE AWA part. So I wanted to ask, like, do they expect us to like present any liberal sort of
So
answers
there is
for the
another question. Do you
arguments?
think there can be an element of
I think
human
I
bias
cannot
from examiner
just-
side? Well, I don't think it's important enough for us to worry about. Even if there is an element of human bias, we cannot do anything about it. But no, I don't think there might be an element of human bias in TOEFL responses, because they are not aware of anything except they are just given the responses and they're supposed to score them. And it's not completely scored by humans. It's partly scored by computers based on what I showed to you, the graphs, the things that the areas that were shown, they are judged by the computers, and then the accuracy of the content is judged by the human graders. So
there are new questions.
So there's a question on sending the scores to universities. Do we have to mention the universities at the time of registration, or we can do that after appearing for the exams?
Yes.
So I guess you're given the option of registering for the universities at the time of registration for the exam. But after you have appeared for the exam, you can still send the TOEFL score, but you'll be charged for that. So that won't be free. In the speaking section for taking side, is it necessary to quote all the facts? Can we quote our own perspective for a side? So the speaking section is the part in the speaking section where you have to take a side. You actually have to quote your own perspective. In the part where you have the campus situation and the changes, and whether you agree with the speaker opposing the changes, there you have to mention the change, mention the speaker's stance, and then mention your own perspective. Your perspective can be anything. It could be agreement or disagreement. That doesn't matter. All that matters is how eloquently are you able to stand by it. I hope that answers your question.
Madeeha, I think there was something missing from side of Arshul. He was trying to say something, right?
You're welcome.
Arshul?
Yes, am I audible to her or?
Yes, you are audible. Yeah, you were saying something.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I was saying like it is very similar to the one which perspective-based responses. So, like, do they expect us to write any liberal sort of responses, or like we can present any side of the argument and they'll just judge it on the basis of the types of arguments or quality of arguments we are giving them, or do they have any like preconceived notions of answers they're expecting?
So what I understand from your question is you're asking if your side, or if your perspective, what your perspective is matters, whatever your perspective is, does that matter, or is it solely based on the quality of your response? If that's okay. So if they're asking your perspective solely, and there is nothing related to the question, there is no particular content in the question, like any notice or any paragraph or any lecture, and they're asking your perspective about it, then it does not matter. It absolutely does not matter whatever you think about it. They don't care what you think about it. What does matter is how fluently are you able to develop your ideas, and how eloquently are you able to support it, how eloquently are you able to stand by your whatever side you're choosing. And if you would listen to yourself, would you buy it? Think about it that way. And for the speaking section, you have to practice the speaking section by recording yourself. And at the end of the speaking section, you have to listen to yourself. So listen to yourself and judge yourself. Are you fluent enough? Are you clear enough? Are your ideas going through? You know, if you make some of your friends listen to it, and if you ask, what did you understand by my response, and they'd be like, oh well, I think you're saying something else. If they did not understand what you are trying to say, then you are on the, like, you might be getting a low score in your responses. So try to be understandable. That's all that matters. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes.
So the question I have here is, does scoring a high GRE and TOEFL score compensates for low GPA for applying to PhDs in USA? Well, I guess it's a holistic approach. When the professors are seeing your application, they're saying everything. I don't think anything compensates for anything else. And I think Sabaudin Bhai would be able to answer this question as well.
Yes, so I think let me say it like that, like each and every part of your application is important. Yes, not only the scores, but also like your publication record, your scientific or whatever research experience or whatever experience you have counts there in your applications. And of course, it makes your CV or resume on the top of the others. But yes, the scores have to be at least those that they are at least qualifying you. Like, for example, some universities say, yeah, okay, 100 marks out of 120 in TOEFL. Okay, so if you have like 100 marks, that doesn't mean that you can get the admit over there, because that is the minimum marks which they are telling you. Of course, the students over there are like 105, 110, or maybe 118 or 20 as well. But that is something university specific. You have to check like what is the minimum requirement, and then keep everything in your application strong. So yes, that's what I can say. And yeah, and you have to keep your fingers crossed that everything goes well, and then they invite you for interview or so on. In near future, we will be doing this seminar about the SOP, resume, and like how to write. Next month, I am planning, in October, I am planning to do this seminar about how to write a letter to professors, because that's also part of this application process. That's very important component. But let's go ahead with further questions. If you have, please feel free to ask. Because
I have a brief question. Like, what is the ideal time for applying for TOEFL after giving GRE? Like, generally, people suggest me like 2 weeks are enough to prepare for everything regarding the TOEFL after GRE.
Yes, that's exactly. If you are like, but you don't know, like, we cannot say it like that. So one can think about like, one says that 2 weeks is enough for preparing for TOEFL, but again, this thing but comes, which means that the other person don't know how good was your preparation about GRE. It could be that you were not prepared good enough for GRE as well. And then, of course, I will say that, yeah, 2 weeks is not enough for TOEFL as well. So it all depends. Like if everything is well planned, then and you have very good preparation with GRE, 2 weeks is good enough. But like, let's say like 4 weeks is also like, if you don't have time, you have other projects to handle, and meanwhile, then it can also take 4 weeks. But one thing you have to keep in mind, that either is GRE or TOEFL, you have to give the exam well in advance so that your scores are available before the deadline. Like, because after the deadline, and they have the reason to disqualify you, because there are thousands of students and they need only one reason to put your application in the trash. So always be on time with the application. Other questions? Because Warda and Madeeha today here online for you all, they can directly answer your questions. It's fine if you would like to ask them questions later. You can just write them on their email address. If they are provided in the previous in the chat, you can see that. And otherwise, you can ask it right now. Otherwise, or then if there is no further question, I will just stop the recording and then I have to make some announcements.
So there is a question, if there is any tip for maintaining the focus while listening to long passages and relating that with questions. I would suggest you to practice making notes simultaneously while you're listening to the passages. So that would help you. So if you're making notes, that would give you a reason to listen, right? So practice making notes while you're listening, and with practice, you'll be able to make notes in such a way that your notes would be consisting of everything that's in the lecture or long passage. Does that answer your question? So what is the ideal time to give these tests if we are in our final year of UG? Yeah, Warda has answered. It's August to October is the ideal time.
Other questions? So if there is no further questions, then I will stop the recording, and then we have some announcement from Salman, chairperson of SSGSA.